Egypt is a land of extremes. It is a land of ancient mysteries. It is a place in a constant state of transformation and a place where the same timeless scenes have played out, unaltered, for thousands of years. It is home to chaotic and mesmerizing cities, to ancient temples, and to the Nile, the meandering lifeblood of a country that's played witness to the rise and fall of countless empires. On the adventurer's bucket list, there are few places that seem to captivate us with such an enduring fascination. Long before the ancient Greeks or Romans, there were Egyptians, and they left an indelible mark on the imagination of people across the world and across time. The captivating civilization whose influence is still felt in art, architecture, and culture. Everyone knows the pyramids, but Egypt offers so much more. Countless time-worn temples, tombs, and monuments bring to life the triumphs of human ingenuity, spirit, and strength. The maelstrom that is Cairo's streets, a side effect of being one of the most densely populated cities on Earth. Egypt is an amalgam of its location. It is African, it is Mediterranean, it is Middle Eastern. But more than anything, it is principally, unapologetically, and unequivocally Egyptian. This is also the modern story of a kind, inviting, and hospitable people proud of their history and working to take it back. A people looking to the future, but always with an eye on their history. This is a land where the past is always present, the present is ever-changing, and every moment is an opportunity for discovery. Welcome to Egypt.
Let travel surprise you. Let moments excite you. Let me try to guide you along the way. There's a world out there waiting. Sights that need gazing. Food that needs tasting. And laughs in between. Oh, wherever I go. Whatever I see, all that I know is you're coming with me. You won't forget it. You know the best is yet to come. Be it land or sea, trust Tyler Travels TV.
Egypt is one of those places that seems so completely, at least for me, out of reach. Like, I never in a million years thought that I would ever actually go to Egypt, even as much as we travel. I thought, it's so far beyond the scope of my life, I'll never be able to go there. And honestly, it didn't feel real before we left. It didn't feel real while we were there. And honestly, if I didn't have all this footage, I don't know that I would think that it feels real now. You know what I mean? Watching back all this footage, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. All these amazing things that we were able to do. So before I found out that we were going to Egypt, I would say that my extent of knowledge about Egypt was limited to the song King Tut by Steve Martin. And then probably the Pharaoh in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's about the extent of my knowledge on Egypt. Maybe, Aida, the Elton John one. That was about the extent of my knowledge on Egypt. And so before we left, we knew about 3 months before that we were going to do this. And I sort of had this idea that I was going to become an amateur Egyptologist. And here's the thing. There's 5,000 years of history. So 3 months, people dedicate their entire lives to being Egyptologists, and so it was a pretty vain attempt. That said, before we left, I read all of these cover to cover, every single one of them. So I had a couple more books that I skimmed through. This is the stack of books that I read cover to cover. So I learned, I would say, a decent amount before I left, but Truly nothing can prepare you for Egypt until you're there. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I found to be utterly fascinating. And I'm just going to warn you now, I'm going to butcher a lot of the language. I'm going to try my best, but please be kind. Both ancient Egyptian and Arabic, but then you're also throwing in like some Greek, and there's a lot. I'm gonna mispronounce a lot, but I'm gonna do my darndest. We start our trip to Egypt by flying into Cairo, by far Egypt's largest and most populous city. We'll spend 3 full days here exploring the city from our home base of the Nile Ritz-Carlton. We'll traverse the Khan el-Khalili market with its labyrinth of stalls. We'll climb to the top of Cairo Tower for a bird's eye view of the city. We'll visit the Citadel and the spectacular domed Mosque of Muhammed Ali. And we'll take a stroll through the Egyptian Museum to see some of Egypt's most famous artifacts. We'll then head just slightly south to Giza, where we'll gaze in awe of the last standing wonder of the ancient world, the pyramids. We'll get up close and personal with the Sphinx before we take a private tour inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. After our time in Cairo, we fly all the way to Egypt's southern border with Sudan to visit the Great Temples of Abu Simbel, an impressive monument on the banks of Lake Nasser with a fascinating story. From there, we'll fly north to Aswan, where we'll board the MS Tamr for a relaxing river cruise down the Nile. During our 3 nights on the Nile, we'll be stopping to visit some incredible places along the way, such as the Temple of Philae, the Temple of Kom Ombo, the Temple of Karnak, and we'll have a private nighttime tour of the Temple of Luxor. Our final stop is the Valley of the Kings, the remote, secluded burial ground for over 60 of Egypt's pharaohs, and the location of Howard Carter's famous discovery in 1922 of the tomb of King Tut. So we did this trip with Adventures by Disney, and honestly, that was the best possible thing we could have done. I don't think we would have done half of the things that we were able to do. No, we wouldn't have done a quarter of the things that we were able to do had it not been that we went with Adventures by Disney. We got to not only go to the Sphinx, we got to go up to the Sphinx. No one gets to do that. We got to go inside the Great Pyramid in a private group. So like all day, people are going in and out and there's hundreds of tourists. We had a private tour with just our group of like 30 people inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was insane. We had a private nighttime tour of the Temple of Luxor. We had so much. And not to mention the guides that we had, they made this trip. They were the most amazing people. We'll talk more about all of this stuff, but I just want to say that if you do end up going to Egypt, this is the way to do it. There's no other way to do it. It was incredible.
It's like impossible to see, but there's literally sand in between the runways.
So since we were doing this with Adventures by Disney, we couldn't simply just get off the plane. Oh no, we got off the plane. There was a man with our name on a sign. He then took us to a golf cart and they drove us through the airport on a golf cart. Then they took us to the next meeting point where there was a private driver waiting to take us to our hotel. It was like we were like royalty. Driving in Cairo is utter chaos. There are no lanes to speak of, few stoplights, and no discernible rules. Cars pass within inches of each other, and scooters weave in and out of traffic like Frogger. You'll be hard-pressed to find any cars without significant damage. Pedestrians cross whenever and wherever they like. People, bikes, scooters, cars, and even donkeys all clamor for their slice of the road. And, like many places with desert climates, the city becomes more chaotic and full of people after dark when it becomes cooler out. Less visibility, more people, and more than a few horns blaring. This is not a place where one should rent a car. Best leave this one to the professionals. It's all very entertaining from the back seat, but I would never drive here. After nearly 25 hours of travel, we finally arrive at our hotel in Cairo, the Nile Ritz-Carlton. Situated right in the heart of the city, right along the Nile in Tahrir Square, it was the first modern luxury hotel in Cairo. When it first opened its doors in 1959, it was simply called the Nile Hotel, and it remained so until 2015, when Ritz-Carlton renovated and reopened it. That, my friends, is the Nile River.
How flipping cool.
One of my favorite things in Cairo was when Jess was getting ready or we had some downtime, I would just open up our hotel room door and just, it sounds corny, but just sort of embrace the feeling and the sounds of Cairo. The cars honking, the people walking, the boats drifting by on the Nile. Listening to the traffic became one of my favorite pastimes. Horns here have their own language, a Morse code that only local drivers seem to understand. I loved the warm breeze on my face, the smell of the traffic. Simply watching life go by in a place that in some ways is so different from where I come from, but is also so familiar. We are all far more alike than we are different, and nothing proves that better than travel. I always say the best way to get to know a city is to get out on foot and explore. Cairo is a chaotic city, no doubt, but it's not unapproachable, and within minutes, I have fallen in love with this place. Granted, we've only seen about 1% of it, but what I've seen, I like. To an outsider, the streets seem like pandemonium, and they are. On the streets here, one never knows just what you might see. A small truck stacked with laundry piled 25 feet high, oh yeah. Scooters with a family of 5 barely clinging to real estate on the seat, you betcha. Dogs, cats, smiling people, trash, smokers, walkers, shufflers, bikers, grandmas, street vendors, plastic chairs, minarets, kids, rats, horses, scooters, beat-up trucks, BMWs, students, rugs, shoeless people, whistlers, buskers, hucksters, shysters, Coptics, Muslims, tourists, motorcycles, and even the odd donkey. All vie for space on the streets and sidewalks. Our plan basically was to find a local and then cross the street when they did, and honestly, that worked pretty well. It's a beautiful maelstrom, and if you embrace it, you just might end up enjoying it. We make it across the Nile and try to get to Cairo Tower. Now we can see Cairo Tower from the street, so it's an easy landmark to get to, or so we think. So we're almost there, or we think, because you can see it right there. And we're walking down the street, and there's a group of guys standing there, and they're like, Cairo Tower? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, no. So they came over, they're like, you gotta go back to the main street and go all the way down and go back. It was very nice of them to stop us, because they knew we were lost. Cairo Tower is a beacon on the Cairo skyline. It first opened in 1961, and at 614 feet tall for a time, it was the tallest structure in Egypt, 150 feet taller than the Great Pyramid. There's an observation deck and a restaurant at the top that rotates while you eat.
All right, we've been wandering the streets. We're over here at Cairo Tower. There's like this kind of gardeny area in front of it. It's really pretty.
So we finally come upon the entrance to Cairo Tower. We linger for a few minutes in front of the tower, finally able to take in where we are. The cylindrical tower is quite tall and stands out handsomely on the Cairo skyline. Slats weave in and around, creating diamond shapes all the way up, evoking the lotus plant. We take a few pictures and then head to the entrance. We walk up about 20 steps to the door, present our tickets, and sit inside, admiring a 360-degree mosaic in the lobby as we await our elevator ride. The elevator doors finally open. We walk around a couple steps and get to the open air area, and when our eyes adjust, it's spectacular. From here, all of Cairo is laid out before us. To the east and right below us, we see large high-rises and grand hotels right along the banks of the Nile. To the west, through the haze, we can barely make out the distinctive shape of the pyramids. We see a million variations of brown, tan, beige, orange, and red shine back at us, touched as if by a paintbrush with areas of green. And running right through the middle is the mighty Nile, winding its way through the heart of the city on its way to the Mediterranean.
So what's cool is that if you look close enough, you can see the freaking pyramids. How cool is that? I cannot wait to go see those up close soon.
The warm wind whips through our hair, but we can still hear the cacophonous traffic below. We meander around the viewing platform to see the city from different angles, but I keep coming back to the view of the pyramids. It just doesn't seem real that I could be seeing them with my own eyes, but there they stand, a sentinel through time. Below, bridges humming with traffic cross the Nile, while feluccas and motorboats lazily bob in the water. The bustle of daily life goes on for millions of Cairenes unabated. And I am reminded why in any city, I love to get up as high as I can when I first get there. It's a fantastic way to get to know the layout of a city, and the views are almost always stunning. After a while, we head downstairs to the Sky Cafe for dinner. As the sun sets over Cairo and the city begins to light up, we head back downstairs to make our way slowly back to our hotel. Cairo really hits its stride when the sun goes down. People begin to come out, taking advantage of the cooler weather, enjoying time with friends and family after a hard day's work.
Number 460.
One thing we've definitely noticed is Cairo at night, like everything is open so late every day of the week. And it is so much busier out at any time of night than it is during the day. It's wild to see. Okay, I know we joked that like from above it kind of reminded us of London if you squint. I feel like parts of it can look a lot like Paris, which is kind of cool.
And that would be, at least in part, because of Baron Haussmann, who is the one who basically laid out the streets of Paris. He had a huge influence on this guy, whose name is Khedive Ismail, and he ruled Egypt in the 1870s. He visited Paris in 1867, absolutely fell in love with it, and he returned to Egypt determined to lay out areas of Egypt in a very similar fashion to the way that Paris was laid out. So that's why, especially in this area in Tahrir Square, you see a lot of wide open boulevards, you see a lot of French-inspired architecture, things like that. It's because of him. And also, fun fact, the Suez Canal was also completed under Khedive Ismail.
All right, we're back at our hotel. We got to explore the square a bit, and I think we're gonna head on in.
So up until now, Jessica and I have been on our own, but this morning we're meeting with the rest of our group. We're doing this with Adventures by Disney, and so we're meeting the rest of our travel group. We're going to learn about all the things that we're doing. They have this great breakfast where they sit down and tell us about everything. But most importantly, this is when we meet our adventure guides. So we're first introduced to Mostafa, one of two adventure guides. Mostafa is from Cairo, and he is exactly the person you want leading you through Egypt. He is kind, funny, and trust me when I say that he is the man that you want on your side when things don't go according to plan in Egypt. He and I had several deep conversations, and you would be hard-pressed to find someone more passionate and proud of showing off their country. And next up, we meet Mike. Now, Mike is from the United States, and he was our second adventure guide. Mike and I immediately got along, and I have no doubt that he and I would be best friends in another life. He is the perfect person to be hosting Adventures by Disney because he's fun, funny, outgoing, and he's always upbeat. Next up, we meet Nesreen. Nesreen is a real-life, bona fide Egyptologist, and she was with us throughout our entire trip. She is a certified genius, she knows an incredible amount about Egypt, and she taught us so much about every place that we went. She gave us perspective and context, and she made ancient Egypt come alive with storytelling. And finally, we had a special guest, Magdi. Magdi is from Egypt, but he has lived in the US, and he and his team are the ones that arrange everything in Egypt for Adventures by Disney. I nicknamed him the Godfather of Egypt because I swear nothing happens in this country without his approval. He is a man who knows how to get things done, and he is probably the nicest person you will ever meet in your life. You're going to see these four people throughout this entire journey, so I kind of wanted to take a minute and just introduce them to you. And, you know, they were so incredible. When I say they're incredible, I don't mean that they were like, oh, they were really good. I mean, they were amazing. They could have shown me around my local mall, and it would have been like the greatest trip of my life. They were that good. And so I am so thankful that we got to meet all of them. And honestly, I'm really thankful because even now, I would consider all of them to be friends. We board a motor coach and we are off, driving through the streets of Cairo. Egyptians are in a constant state of erasing and replacing, demolishing and rebuilding the city victorious, an area with a history that dates back 5,000 years. It is at once fossilized and ever-changing, demolished and rebuilt. From the ancient Memphis to the Mamluks to the Ottomans to modern Cairo, change is the only constant. But all that very real history culminates in what Cairo is today, which, to me, makes the entirety of the city feel like I'm in a movie. So much of Egypt feels to me like I'm stepping onto a film set. We can blame Indiana Jones, but Egypt just feels cinematic, and that is definitely the case with our first stop, the Citadel and Mosque of Muhammed Ali. Built by Salah ad-Din in the 12th century, the Citadel is a massive complex home to 4 separate museums and 3 mosques, most notably the Mosque of Muhammed Ali, the dome of which is visible all over Cairo. And though it has drastically changed in the last 800 years or so, it was from this very citadel that Egypt was ruled for nearly 700 years. Although it only takes up a small chunk of real estate within the citadel, with its massive silver domes and minarets, the Mosque of Muhammad Ali has been a staple on the skyline of Cairo since it was added in the mid-1800s. Built in a classic Ottoman Turkish style, it took 18 years to build under the orders of reformist ruler Muhammad Ali, who is often viewed as the creator of modern Egypt. We first pass through an outer courtyard surrounded on all sides by towering columns and arched walkways.
Okay, so we're in that part where you take your shoes off, which is cool. It's so beautiful. Oh my gosh.
One thing I found is that many Westerners might be a little hesitant about going into a mosque. They might feel like they're not allowed or they're not welcome, but I've personally found, with very few exceptions, that respectful visitors are welcomed in most religious places. The courtyard is stunning, swathed in alabaster and dominated in the center by an ablution fountain. It's peaceful here, a far cry from the chaotic Cairo just outside its walls. High above the courtyard, you'll find a green-hued clock tower, a gift from King Louis-Philippe of France in exchange for an obelisk from the Temple of Luxor that currently stands in the Place de la Concorde in Paris. A nice idea, except for the fact that the clock has never worked. Walking in, it's easy to be overwhelmed by the beauty of this space. It's massive. 4,000 worshippers can pray here at once. Hundreds of hanging lights all around are suspended from the ceiling, hovering above the marble floors just as they have since the mosque was first built. Beautiful chandeliers, some of them original, dating back hundreds of years, still float over the heads of the crowds, drawing your eye up to the ceiling. And while the whole mosque is beautiful, I can't take my eyes off the domed ceilings. They are incredibly ornate with vibrant colors, stained glass, and inlaid gold. They are magnificent. Standing in the middle of this place, you can't help but feel awe and admiration for the artisans and artists that crafted every meticulous detail. Each carving, each dash of paint, every glass lampshade is magnificent. Along the outer wall, you'll find the tomb of Muhammad Ali with its ornately decorated facade of gold and green. Back outside, you'll find commanding views of Cairo from the upper terrace of the Citadel. A view that I must say does not seem to get old. So we leave the mosque and we're heading to lunch, and one of my favorite things is as you're driving around Cairo, you can see these boxes up on stilts on a lot of houses. And so come to find out, those are pigeon boxes, and people raise pigeons here. It's a big sport here in Egypt, and people get really serious about it. They have pigeon races, there's all kinds of stuff. And if you're into doing that, it could become a really big thing. And what's cool is there are even like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic reliefs of people raising pigeons. So it goes back a long time. Lunch is at the Al-Azhar Park, a respite of calm and green in the middle of busy, frenzied Cairo.
So pretty. Wow.
Lunch is at Studio Masser, also known as the Citadel View Restaurant. A very appropriate name, seeing as how it has a great view of, you guessed it, the Citadel. I love the lobby of this little restaurant with its open-air doorways, the slatted roof and the hanging lanterns, and the beautifully tiled flowing fountain in the middle. What's amazing about this place is while you're sitting there, you're looking out at these beautiful manicured gardens. It's so hard to believe that this used to be a literal garbage dump. Prior to 2005, this whole area was just mountains of trash and garbage, and it is now arguably the most beautiful park at least in Cairo, maybe even in Egypt. Lunch is, as I would come to find out, a typical Egyptian meal, starting with various dips like hummus, tahini, and baba ganoush, all served with Egyptian flatbread. Then, out come the still smoking kebabs on a nifty little contraption, a small gold box filled with charcoal, making sure the meat stays warm and smoky. If I had known how many kebabs I was going to end up eating on this trip, I may have just stuck to the sides this time. I'm not kidding you. I think every single meal we had almost was kebabs. I don't think I've eaten that much food on a stick in my life, with maybe the exception of like the 3 to 4 corn dogs I eat when I go to the state fair. Besides pigeon boxes, one other thing you might notice as you drive around this area of Cairo is a long wall with a flat top and arched columns. It gets taller and taller and taller as you drive. This was the aqueduct that supplied water to the Citadel. So as I said, before we went on this trip, I spent about the 3 months before we left trying in vain to become an amateur Egyptologist. And I like to put it this way. There are people who dedicate their entire lives to studying something like US history, which is like 250 years of history. And there's no way that they could possibly know everything about US history. Now imagine trying to learn 5,000 plus years of history, which is what you're looking at when it comes to Egypt. I mean, there are people who dedicate their entire lives to a certain type of statue from a certain era of ancient Egyptian civilization, and they become experts in that, and they can spend their entire lives doing that. So everything I learned was very broad, surface level stuff. But imagine trying to learn all of this from mummies and bits of parchment and pottery fragments. I mean, it's wild. Egypt has arguably the longest and richest history of any civilization that's still in existence today. And in an effort to begin to show off all of that history, they're building a new museum called the Grand Egyptian Museum, or the GEM. Now, the GEM has been under construction for about 20 years now. It was originally slated to open, I think, 2012, then it was moved to 2014, then 2018, then 2020. It is now, when I'm filming this, late 2024, and it's still not open, although they are doing some soft openings finally. So it is maybe in the works that it will open here very soon. But when this place opens, it is going to be incredible. And I really, really hope that at some point in my future, I get the chance to go back and visit the gem. The place isn't even open yet, and I could probably do an hour-long video just on how cool this place is going to be. But I won't, so I'm just going to tell you a couple quick things. First of all, it's going to house between 50 and 100,000 artifacts, and for the first time ever, all of King Tut's treasures are going to be in one place, and that's like 5,000 pieces just in that. It's going to be one of the largest museums in the entire world at like 5.3 million square feet. It cost over $1 billion to construct this thing. Right as soon as you walk inside, there's going to be a giant 3,200-year-old statue of Ramses II, and 2 times a year, the sun is supposed to shine on his face just like it does in like Abu Simbel, which is a place we'll get to here in a little bit, but it's situated in a way just as it would have been in antiquity, which I just think is so cool. Then apparently when you walk back, there's going to be a huge panorama window that looks out directly over the pyramids, which is so cool. But here's one of my favorite things. The lobby supposedly has like inverted pyramids, and those inverted pyramids are covered in like a smooth limestone, which is what the actual pyramids would have been covered in when they were first built. They were covered in limestone. And that, honestly, that's just the lobby area. So long story short, I am very, very excited to see this place when it officially opens. I think it's going to be incredible. But enough about the gem. Today, we are on our way to the original Egyptian museum that opened in 1902, housed in a salmon pink building right in the heart of Tahrir Square. Upon entering, one of the first things you're going to see is a glass display case with a slate palette in it. Now, a lot of people are going to walk right by that, but walk by that, you should not. This 2-foot-tall, rather innocuous slate palette is one of the oldest known historical documents in the world, and it is arguably the most important relic in the entire museum. Around 3200 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt are run by 2 independent kings. It becomes unified when a king from the south conquers the north, and his name was Narmer. He is the first pharaoh. This palette tells of the unification of Egypt. In it, the king is holding a mace in one hand and in the other, the head of an enemy. It is a symbol of strength and power that will be replicated in Egyptian art for 3,000 years. A little further along, you'll find the oldest life-size statue ever found in Egypt depicting King Djoser. It was Djoser that commissioned the building of a revolutionary type of construction in Egypt, the pyramid. He and his architect Imhotep built Egypt's first pyramid, the Step Pyramid in Saqqara. He was followed a few generations later by this pharaoh named Khufu. Khufu was the builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Ironically, this minuscule ivory carving standing only about 3 inches tall is the only known statue of the pharaoh that built the last standing great wonder of the ancient world. Right behind Khufu, you'll find a full-sized statue of his son, Khafre. It was Khafre that built the second, slightly smaller pyramid at Giza. He's depicted here with the god Horus portrayed as a falcon wrapped around his head in a gesture of protection. Now, it's a little hard to tell because he has a nose here, but you might actually recognize Khafre's face from another little depiction of him, the face on the Sphinx. But it's not just portrayals of pharaohs you'll find here. You can also discover depictions of other ancient Egyptians, like this haunting wooden statue of a priest named Ka'apar, and several statues of other revered figures like the seated scribes, each with an unrolled scroll of papyrus on their laps. The papyrus room displays some ancient tools of the trade. It would be hard to overstate the importance of papyrus in ancient Egypt, and its most important function was that of a writing surface. It was used to record histories, administrative documents, legal works, and religious texts like this, the famous Egyptian Book of the Dead. This served as a map and guidebook to the afterlife, including all the spells that one could need in death, and it provided instructions for the trials one could face, including the test to determine worthiness, the weighing of the heart. For now, there are a few of King Tut's items still on display here, like this recognizable statue of Anubis. This ornate golden box, decorated with painted cobras and surrounded by 4 female deities, is a canopic shrine. Inside of this box were these alabaster canopic jars. Their mission? To preserve the king's mummified organs. This golden chair is the throne of King Tut. It depicts the boy king himself in an intimate setting sitting and talking to his wife. The world-famous burial mask of King Tut is also currently here, but no cameras allowed. The Egyptian Museum opened in 1902, and 20 years later, almost to the day, King Tut's tomb was found and excavated by Howard Carter, effectively doubling the size of the museum's collection overnight. Many Egyptians jokingly refer to the current Egyptian museum as the Egyptian storage closet. Mummies, statues, relics, and sarcophagi all vie for space in this overcrowded museum. How do you display 5,000 years of history in one location? You can't. Therefore, as I've said, a great portion of these items that are currently housed here will eventually be moving to the Grand Egyptian Museum, including all of King Tut's treasures. Most of these mummies will be transferred to the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. While this process is happening, there are currently a lot of empty cases. So, what is to become of this current Egyptian museum? Well, there are definitely some plans in the works. It's currently undergoing renovations, and it will continue to house a collection of artifacts. And while this 120-year-old museum doesn't offer any modern amenities like air conditioning, and is definitely beginning to show its age with some wear and tear, it's sort of nostalgic in itself, with its marbled railings and wooden cases. With its prime location right in the heart of Cairo, it won't be going anywhere anytime soon. And I, for one, am excited to see what they make of this space in the coming years. We have a very busy day today. We are finally going to see the pyramids, but first we are going to the Khan el-Khalili Bazaar. A short trip outside of the downtown tourist area of Cairo shows you the reality of what daily life is like for millions of Cairenes. People hustling around every corner, busy with their day's work. Construction in Cairo has exploded in the last decade, either to the detriment or to the benefit of the country, depending entirely on who you ask. Some of the massive modernization projects include a new administrative capital, contemporary bridges and roadways, and even an area called New Cairo. The first place we're exploring today, however, has withstood the test of time, and it dates back to about the 14th century. We are walking to the Khan el-Khalili market by way of Al-Muiz Street. We start at the Bab el-Fatuha Gate, a rounded medieval fortification built in 1087 to protect the walled Fatimid city of Al-Qahira. It serves as the entrance to Al-Muiz Street. You'll first pass by the Mosque of Al-Hakim, a space that has had a myriad of purposes through time, including as a prison, a stable, a warehouse for Napoleon, and a school. You continue on to the heart of the neighborhood. This is quintessential Old Cairo. Wandering here, you find yourself in a symphony of sights, sounds, textures, and smells. When you close your eyes and imagine walking down a street in Cairo, this is it. Trinkets hang in shop stalls. Feral cats and dogs roam the streets, unfazed by the walkers-by. Part cultural neighborhood, part shopping district, part open-air museum. This area was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1979. It was in these streets that Cairo's most celebrated Nobel Prize-winning writer, Naguib Mahfouz, set his Cairo series, the Palace Walk Trilogy. Much has changed since he lived here, but in a broader sense, everything remains much the same as it has for hundreds of years. Hawkers push their goods, minarets dot the landscape, people come and go, carrying on with their daily lives. There is no reality in the world except for change. So said Naguib Mahfouz, and in that way, this neighborhood is one that he would still recognize today. The streets here are narrow and winding, with vendors pouring out into the alleyways. There are shops everywhere, some selling legitimate sundries to locals, but most are peddling tacky, touristy crap. Scarves, magnets, tchotchkes, statues, t-shirts, shot glasses, lamps, ashtrays, belly dancing outfits, and miscellaneous bric-a-brac fill every square inch of space. Shop owners would first try to speak to us in English, and if we didn't respond, they would try any other host of languages we hear: Spanish, German, and I'm pretty sure one guy speaks to me in Dutch. The shop owners can be a little pushy, but honestly, I kind of feel like part of it is more of a show now because it's what people expect. But honestly, it can be kind of fun. The bartering process, if you think of it like a game, can be kind of fun. And if you don't want something, just say la or no, politely but firmly, and you shouldn't have any issues. As Paul Theroux said, in Cairo, there was a thin line between pestering and hospitality. Indeed, they often amounted to the same thing. We continue on, undaunted, hands in our pockets, and as we meander our way out of the main touristy drag, the pressure lowers. It's easy and a little fun to get temporarily lost here. The Naguib Mahfouz coffee shop and restaurant is named after, you guessed it, Naguib Mahfouz, and according to our guide, he frequented this cafe prior to his death in 2006. Originally called simply the Khan el-Khalili restaurant, after winning his 1988 Nobel Prize for Literature, it was renamed in his honor. Along the walls, you'll find pictures and other miscellaneous articles celebrating the Nobel laureate. Our group has rented out the entire back room for lunch. Lunch begins with what you'd expect. Salad with roasted tomatoes and croutons, various dips like tahini, Egyptian flatbread aish baladi, falafel, kafta, sambusas with halloumi cheese, lentil soup, moussaka, and other various little dips and delights of culinary goodness. All of those seem to be served at pretty much every meal that we have, but on today's menu, we have something that's a little more adventurous.
We're excited to eat. Supposedly we're supposed to eat pigeon.
The pigeons that they eat here, it's not the same flying rats around New York City. They're like raised, they are like, it's like a thing here. Like they have,
Yeah, so we'll see.
I'm excited to try it.
Yeah.
Before we each get our little birdies though, we are given a demonstration on how to eat it by Mustafa.
All right, so we eat pigeon with hands here.
Yep. All right.
Right, you can see. He's like pigeon. All right, so you have to split it into two halves. That's the rice stuffed in.
Oh, rice and stuff.
All right, here you will find the two little parts of meat, brown in color. This like duck meat. Right, and the spices with the rice is amazing. Onions and black pepper, and it's really, really beautiful. All right, so how you can eat this part like this?
All right, good job.
All right. The other part is you can just get it like this, the meat.
Oh. Yum, yum.
It's really yummy.
Oh gosh.
Naguib Mahfouz had another great line. He said, "Fear does not prevent death, it prevents life." And I just love that quote. And I feel like in some small way, it is a bit applicable to today's main course.
All right, Tyler's gonna try the pigeon.
We just had a demonstration. What do they say they call it?
me see
Adventures
it.
by Disney, not vacations by Disney. This is the adventure part. So you split it in half. So hot.
You gotta say, you gotta say, oh, that's why I use my knife, but I
stuffed with rice.
It's very good.
Is it good? There you go. Yeah?
You know, I'm tempted to say that it tasted like chicken, but honestly, it tasted more like a baked potato stuffed with fragrant rice. It was actually really good. Maybe the Colonel can start serving Kentucky Fried Pigeon. So we're leaving the souk. And remember, we are on a huge motor coach. So I'm assuming that we're going to walk to the main road and board the bus there. No. Our bus driver picks us up in the middle of the bazaar and drives us out of there. To say it's a tight fit is like saying Sandy's pants in Greece were a bit snug. We are passing with inches to spare. If my window opened, I could have tousled someone's hair. People are coming out of their shops trying to help us direct the bus. Somehow, we get out of there, and we are on our way to the main event, the pyramids. The pyramids stand out in the distance from nearly everywhere in Cairo. 3 mountainous points looming on the horizon, growing seemingly organically from the ground, pointing skyward. But nothing prepares you for how utterly massive they are in person. During the day, you'll find hundreds of tourists walking around, taking pictures, riding various animals, taking pictures of themselves riding various animals. But we have a private tour of the Great Pyramid of Giza. When we come back in a bit, all the tourists will be gone, and the place will be ours, alone. Our first stop is the Sphinx.
We're about to go in between the paws of the Sphinx, and I cannot wait. I'm so excited. It is so sunny, so hot. So our guide was just telling us this used to be like a harbor over here, and Tyler was just reminding me that this used to be mostly buried in sand, like all the way up to the nose.
So in 1798, when the French with Napoleon arrived, this Sphinx
Tyler,
was
you look like Johnny Depp.
I know. It was buried up to, almost to its nose. So literally they had to excavate all of this. So think about like all the paws and everything. They had no idea what was under it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So we're doing this with Adventures by Disney, as we've said. And we do get, do you want to say it?
I say a couple of perks. So you can see over there behind us, there's some people. That's the closest most people can get to the Sphinx. But because we're with Adventures by Disney, we can go up to the Sphinx. Touch
Between the
Sphinx.
paws.
Between the paws.
Exclusive. Like they
Only
literally
for
had to
Disney.
unlock the gate for just our group, which is so cool.
That alone is probably worth it. And
Yeah.
there's more.
We have some more exclusive things, yeah.
In a land of mysterious ancient monuments, perhaps none is more enigmatic than the Sphinx. It sits, paws extended, ever watching, a tireless sentinel in front of the pyramid complex. Now, normally, one can't get this close to the Sphinx. Close enough that we could remove a thorn from its paws, but here's the thing. We're here with Adventures by Disney. Adventures by Disney doesn't like being told where they can and can't go, and Adventures by Disney doesn't like lines, and Adventures by Disney doesn't like crowds. So while most people are stuck 100 feet away, relegated to their fenced-off, far-away selfie stands, with the mighty power of the mouse, we not only get to go down to the Sphinx, we get to walk all the way around it. I try and pretend I'm here alone. I walk slowly, taking in deep breaths, attempting to comprehend the scope of time, but I come up short. To feel the artistry that was carved and chiseled by a sculptor nearly 5,000 years ago is exhilarating. This is the type of place that no matter how hard you try, your mind can't comprehend or appreciate it enough. It's hard to describe the feeling. It is at once comforting and terrifying how long it's been here. The entire complex sits, a metaphorical kick in the face to the passage of time. It's oddly calming. If you can block out the throngs of tourists, the con men trying to sell you camel rides, and the motor coach buses driving noisily all around you, you can almost hear it. The distinct clang of tools, the murmurs of the workers, all working in tandem towards a monumental, unimaginable goal. An appeasement to the gods that no one prays to anymore. An extraordinary, unfathomable undertaking simply to house the tomb of one man. Now, it's all well and good to see them from the outside, but we are here to take a private tour inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Pyramid of Khufu. You know the pyramids. You've seen them in textbooks, in movies, and pre-framed photos at TJ Maxx. But what those photos don't get across is the feeling you get when you're standing in their shadow. The weight of feeling utterly inconsequential. The way the heat of the desert presses down on your skin, oppressive and unrelenting. The way the warm wind whips across your face, the same wind that has worn down the pyramids for the last 40 centuries. It is, more than anywhere I've been, a humbling experience. Okay, so this is one of my favorite ways to kind of put into context just how old the pyramids are. I'm going to try and draw it out for you here. So, say you're in New York City and you're looking at the Statue of Liberty and you're going by and you're like, wow, this thing has been here for like 130 years. That's so old. Then you go to something like St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican and you're like, wow, this was built in 1626. It makes the Statue of Liberty basically look brand new. Then you go back to something like the Colosseum in Rome and you're like, wow, this was built in 80 AD, over 1,500 years before that basically brand new building of St. Peter's. So then you go back again to when something like the Odyssey was written, and now you're looking at something like the 7th century BC, so like another 700 years or so back. Now, imagine that the Great Pyramid was built 2,000 years before the Odyssey. The Great Pyramid was built and stood there for 1,000 years before King Tut. And then there was yet another 1,000 years before Cleopatra came along. Cleopatra lived closer to the time of cell phones than she did the pyramids being built. If you look at the year 0, more time has passed from the pyramids being built to the year 0 than from the year 0 to now. The mind absolutely reels. The base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu alone covers about 13 acres. It was originally 481 feet tall, but over time it's weathered and had its cap removed, and now stands at about 455 feet tall. For 3,800 years, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. The pyramids were once encased entirely in a smooth-sided limestone, but over time it was worn away or taken away for use in other projects. A few areas still show what that would have looked like. It's big, like really big, and really, really old. And here I am, a small little morsel of a man here on this earth for a fleeting moment, standing in front of this monument of truly epic proportions. Man, the pyramids really make you think existentially. All right, we're about to go in the pyramid. Couple fun facts: 481 feet tall, 2.3 million blocks, each one weighing more than a ton, close to a ton, if not more. We are about to crawl in.
Oh, and there's a desert doggy.
Desert dog. We're about to climb into the main chamber. You can see there's like the upper one and the lower one. We're going into the lower one, but they said no photos, videos, whatever. And I guess they just recently changed the rules. They don't even allow cell phones in anymore because I'm sure people had them in their pocket or
Yeah, I mean,
So-
yeah, probably.
I guess if you want to go inside yourself, you have to come to Egypt.
There you
And
go.
if you, or there's a ton of documentaries you can watch too. But if you want to go in by yourselves after hours, you got to come with Adventures by Disney.
Aw,
This is
cute.
nuts. When we were here earlier, there was so many people. It was just filled. And now we're the only ones here.
It's so cool.
When the people at Listerine made this Listerine pocket pack of mints, they were there at the factory and they had no idea that this little pack of mints would someday go inside the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Whether it's a scarf, a jacket,
Really makes you
whatever,
think.
and then jewelry.
Just as advertised, no one else is here. We are completely alone. Well, as alone as 40 people can be when they're all together. And as a large Cairo sunset hangs in the air, we make our way inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu. So you're no longer allowed to bring in cameras to the Great Pyramid, and then they confiscate your phones as you're going in, so you can't take any photos or videos. So how do I get across what it was like being inside? I have a couple little photos that were given to me that I can kind of show you as I talk, but I could talk about this for an hour. I actually wrote down a huge summation of it, but I'm like, it would take me 20 minutes just to go through it all. So I'll write a blog and go into a lot more detail, but I'll just give you the quick little summation right now. So the first thing to remember is that the pyramid was not made to go in. Remember, it was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, and once it was sealed up, you were never supposed to go back inside. Obviously that didn't happen. They think basically even the people who built it might have gone in and looted, and obviously all the treasures are gone, and they think it was the people who built it who did that. There's the main entrance, which is the one higher up, and as they laid Khufu to rest and the priests were leaving, they put 3 huge limestone blocks in the way so people could not go back in. You first walk in, and honestly, it feels more like you're like spelunking. It feels like you're going into a cave at first. You're kind of walking through a little bit, and then you get to the first area where there's a little kind of square tunnel going up. Now, again, people back then were much smaller, and it was never made to go in. So this is not necessarily the most tourist-friendly thing in the whole world. So it's a ramp that goes up at a decent degree, and I had to bend over at the waist in order to go up. So it's not very tall, but I mean, it's maybe 2 or 3 minutes, maybe not even that long of sort of climbing up. Now, it's real small, you know what I mean? It's only a little bit of room on either side. We're going up one by one. Now, keep in mind, during the day, tourists are coming in and out all the time, and from what I've heard, you can actually be passing people in this little tunnel here. I don't know if that's exactly how it works, but it was already pretty tight, and you know, if you give you a little heebie-jeebies there. And remember, there's no airflow in here. There's no wind. It is stagnant air. It's humid, and you can taste the breath of everyone who's visited for the last 100 years. So you finally get up to the top of that tunnel there, and then you are in the Grand Gallery. And that was the thing I was most excited to see. It's this huge, long gallery, if you will, that again continues to go upward, and it's sort of stacked, and it comes in little by little, and it's an arch going all the way up. And to think about how this was built 2,700 years BCE is just crazy. You can't fit a piece of paper in between these stones. They are so perfectly put together. I mean, even on the outside, they are perfectly fitted to each other. It's wild. So at least in the Grand Gallery, you have some height, and you can kind of, there are stairs on either side, you can kind of go up or down. So we're climbing up the Grand Gallery, and you get to the top, and there's this little area where you have to get on your hands and knees and crawl down a hallway. It's not super duper long, so you have to get on your hands and knees, you crawl down, and then you get to the King's Chamber, which is like right in the center, and it's this pretty massive room with a giant sarcophagus in the middle, and it used to hold untold treasures of King Khufu. There was so much in there, but now it's basically just a big, open, empty stone room, with the exception of the sarcophagus in the middle. Now, what's so cool about this sarcophagus is it is bigger than any of the tunnels or ways to get into the pyramid. Any of the entrances, it wouldn't fit, which means they built up the pyramid, put the sarcophagus there and then finished the pyramid around it. It's this huge red granite thing. That is so cool to me. So we spend a few minutes up in the king's chamber and just kind of try and take it in. You can touch the sarcophagus and just kind of be there. It was just such a cool feeling. And people kind of trickle out. They go back down the grand gallery. So I'm going down the grand gallery, and at the bottom, there's another passageway that leads to the queen's chamber. And so basically Mustafa was sitting there. He's like, if you want to go ahead and go back out, you can go ahead and leave. If you want to go to the queen's chamber, you can go there now. So I get on my hand. This is the smallest passage by far. You get on your hands and knees and you crawl through this relatively long passageway, and you get to the queen's chamber, and it's much smaller than the king's chamber, which is the one up higher, but it's just as cool. And I was in there, and there's probably only, 3 or 4 other people in there, and they all kind of trickled out. I never thought I'd be able to ever go to Egypt, let alone see the pyramid, let alone go inside. And here I am, inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, in this room, completely by myself. It is silent. And it was just one of the coolest feelings in my entire life. So anyway, finally, reluctantly, I get up and go back down that passageway to get to the front. Jessica's standing there at the entrance kind of waiting for me. And so we walk back out and finally get some fresh air. And I stand there on top of the Great Pyramid for just a few minutes and just look out. We stand atop the Great Pyramid of Giza, looking out over a breathtaking red sunset. Sometimes you have things like this built up in your mind and you just know that when you get there, it's going to be a life-changing experience. And then once you're there, it's a disappointment. This is not one of those times. This was life-changing.
Okay, we did it. We're all so sweaty. It was so worth it, so fun. But look at this sunset.
That is the Cairo sunset if I've ever seen one. That is the Cairo sunset of my dreams.
It really is. Oh my gosh. And there is Giza over there, just on the other side of the pyramid. We really don't want to leave. Everyone's just like meandering because we're like, oh, it's so cool. Okay, we're at the Marriott and we're going to eat at Mena House here, and this is like absolutely beautiful. It's literally right by the pyramids. We'll show you. It was like a 1-minute drive.
I'll see you. Oh yeah, it's right here. Those would be the pyramids.
Oh yes, that old chestnut.
Exploring the last surviving wonder of the ancient world sure makes one peckish. I'm so hungry I could eat a pyramid. Lucky for me, dinner tonight is an all-you-can-eat buffet. While we're eating, a whirling dervish comes out and does a performance. Now, very basically, the whirling dervish is from the Sufi sect of Islam, and their belief is that as they twirl and twirl and twirl, they basically get into a trance, and that gets them closer to Allah. I mean, just watching it is completely mesmerizing. As with any place that you visit only for a couple days, we barely scratched the surface of Cairo. We didn't get to see any of Coptic Cairo. We only got to go into one mosque. There's so much that we didn't get to go see. We didn't get to see Saqqara. Obviously, the new Grand Egyptian Museum's not quite open yet. So there's so much that I would love to come back and see another time. But for now, we are off to the airport.
All right, we're getting on. Literally wheels up in 4 minutes, but everyone, I mean, that bus was packed, not just with us, but like everyone. So I'm like, I think it's just the way it rolls here.
Like Missy keeps saying, they're not going to take off with 34 people missing.
Yeah.
Probably.
America, though, they'd be gone. Oh, those doors would have been closed 45 minutes ago.
On to flight number 2. Our flight takes us to Egypt's southernmost city, right along the border with Sudan. We fly over what was once Nubian homeland for thousands of years, but since 1971 has been the domain of Lake Nasser. Over the course of the last century and a half or so, 2 dams have been built, the Aswan Dam and the Aswan High Dam. The result? One of the world's largest man-made bodies of water. It is rather hauntingly beautiful in its own way, the stark contrast of a massive lake in the desert. One of the many consequences of building the Aswan High Dam and the creation of Lake Nasser is that not only did many thousands of Nubians lose their homes, but also many temples and tombs and monuments were going to be lost, drowned under the water of Lake Nasser. And that brings us to Abu Simbel. Besides maybe the pyramids, Abu Simbel was the thing I was most excited to see when we were in Egypt, because not only is the monument itself amazing and incredible, the story is fascinating.
So they're having us look away. I don't want to see.
They have to look at the lake. We're not allowed to look to our left. They said we have to wait till we get up here. We're gonna keep walking, and then we'll do the big reveal. All right, we're looking at the lake. So let's first talk about Abu Simbel, the temples themselves first. So these temples were hewn out of solid rock in about the 13th century BCE. There's two temples here, the smaller Temple of Nefertari and then the larger Great Temple of Ramses II. The Great Temple of Ramses II is one of the most striking and awe-inspiring monuments in all of Egypt. It stands as a colossal testament to ancient Egyptian artistry and their precision in architecture and engineering. Although ostensibly dedicated to the ancient gods Amun, Ptah, and Ra-Harakti, it was in reality an egotistical show of power commissioned directly by and for the pharaoh Ramses II. He was the star of the show, with his likeness on 4 imposing colossi worshipped as a god. Would-be invaders from the south would see this towering bit of propaganda, turn tail, and run the other way. It was intended to both frighten and stoke admiration. Inside, you're greeted by a hypostyle hall adorned with 8 more statues of Ramses II, this time his arms crossed in the style of Osiris, god of the afterlife, reinforcing once again his divine status. On either side, intricate reliefs depict military victories of Ramses II at the Battle of Kadesh, a battle he may or may not have actually won, but hey, when you're the pharaoh, you get to decide what goes on the walls. To the sides, storerooms covered in hieroglyphics were used to store offerings to the gods. In the very back, the deified Ramses sits with Ra-Harakti, Amun-Ra, and Ptah. The temple was built and oriented to such an exacting degree that twice a year on February and October 21st, the first rays of the sun would come into the temple and shine on the gods that were once covered completely in gold. And then right next door, you'll find the smaller Temple of Queen Nefertari, which is dedicated to the goddess Hathor. This temple is ornamented with alternating statues of Ramses II and Nefertari. Nefertari was Ramses II's favorite wife, and a mother of a few of his reportedly more than 100 children. The inside of this temple is laid out in a similar fashion, but it's smaller and more intimate. Reliefs of Nefertari adorn the hypostyle hall here, and in the back sanctuary, although it's mostly worn away now, she is depicted as the goddess Hathor in the form of a cow. More color remains in the walls here, reminding us that these temples were once awash in bright, vibrant color. Here, Nefertari stands approvingly behind Ramses II as he once again is seen smiting his enemies. But as amazing as the temples of Abu Simbel are themselves, that's only half the story. And in a land of remarkable things, this might be one of the most remarkable. It's a fascinating story. The temples of Abu Simbel were almost completely lost forever, but not only because of Lake Nasser. Before that, the temples were rediscovered in 1813, and over the course of the last 3,000 years or so, they had been almost completely covered in sand, so only one of the heads of Abu Simbel was sticking up out of the sand. So it was excavated, and then by 1817, they could finally go inside the temple. Then things really got interesting in the 1960s. Very basically, when the Aswan High Dam was being built and historians learned of the imminent threat of Lake Nasser, an international coalition was formed to save several ancient monuments and temples that were doomed in the flooding. Many temples were saved, including Abu Simbel, in great part due to one woman's efforts, Christiane de Roche Noblecourt. Amazingly, they took this temple apart, stone by stone, cut it by hand because electric saws would have chopped away too much, so they had to cut it by hand, and moved it 200 feet back and 60 feet higher, and then completely reassembled it on a fake mountain. That's so cool. And honestly, for the most part, you can't even tell. There's a few spots where you can see the lines where things were cut, especially on the faces. Abu Simbel on its own, without any backstory, would take the breath out of anyone who visits. By its sheer magnitude and beauty, it could stop anyone in their tracks. The 4 colossi of Ramses, moved to their new home, are still staring out into eternity just as they have for 3,000 years. And honestly, they were probably pretty happy about the move. Even a slight change of scenery after 3,000 years has to be welcomed. It is an incredible monument that cuts right to the heart of the human experience, man's eternal quest for immortality.
Our guide Mike is having a private photo session with Tyler.
Ready?
Oh my gosh.
Okay, last flight of the day. I didn't think we'd make it. I think we're gonna do it now. So after a very long, many flights, exhausting, hot day, we finally board our river cruise, and we got quite the entrance. This was this ship's inaugural sailing, and it was this staff's first time, and they were all very, very excited to set sail.
What an entrance.
That was a way to be greeted on the ship. My
That was
goodness.
pretty amazing.
That was incredible.
Yeah, like 10 out of 10.
Wow. Our floating home for the next 3 nights is the brand new motor ship Tamr, an elegant river cruise vessel perfect for a leisurely cruise on the Nile. It provides all the amenities a modern traveler might expect in a comfortable and unpretentious setting. The main floor includes a lobby, a small coffee bar, and an adaptable lounge that is used as an evening reception area and bar. The bottom floor has a small television room, a shop, and the ship's main buffet restaurant. Ample sitting areas are found all over the ship, and for those that need it, it does offer an elevator. A health club and fitness center are available for guests with a treadmill, a few bikes, and a resistance machine. And just down the hall, you'll find the Chef's Restaurant, an elegant, high-end eating experience with an open kitchen and fantastic views of the Nile. Making our way to the top of the ship, you'll find the sun deck, pool, and bar. A generous amount of seating means that any time of day, you can make your way up here and relax while you simply watch life on the Nile go by. Tonight, we're headed to the Old Cataract Hotel, one of, if not the most famous hotel in all of Egypt. Originally opened in 1899, everything about this place radiates old world travel. From the beautiful lush gardens to the classic sophisticated lobby to the Moorish style architecture, it makes me want to don a vintage three-piece linen suit and fan myself with my wide-brimmed hat looking out over the Nile. The hotel's location in Aswan, historically an important trading hub since ancient times, means that this place has hosted a who's who of famous people throughout the years. Winston Churchill, King Farouk, Howard Carter, Jimmy Carter, Margaret Thatcher, Omar Sharif, and Princess Diana, just to name a few. But perhaps most famously, Agatha Christie is said to have penned her book, Death on the Nile, in this very hotel. Down a long hallway lined with some of the hotel's historical memorabilia, you'll find the 1902 restaurant, a beautifully decorated, high-end restaurant serving some of the fanciest food on the Nile. But tonight, we're eating at the more casual outdoor restaurant called Kebabji. Dinner tonight is simple. We start with pickled carrots, tomatoes and cucumber with herbs, lentil soup, tahini, baba ganoush, and hummus, all served with traditional Egyptian flatbread. Main courses, you guessed it, kebabs, steak, chicken shish tawuk. My favorite thing I ate in all of Egypt was the moussaka from here. It was so good. We eat our dinner, happy but exhausted after a long day. A warm breeze blows as boats slowly meander along the Nile. Aswan. Far from the chaos of Cairo, life here is more laid back. Once Egypt's southern border, it sits at the first cataract of the Nile. Here, both feluccas and time sail by. Aswan has been a major city in Egypt dating back for thousands of years. Originally, this marked Egypt's southern border, making it a hub for trade with Nubia and Africa. It was also a strategic military base, a jumping-off point for war with, well, Nubia and Africa. Aswan is situated right at the first cataract of the Nile. And one thing that makes this area really interesting is there's all these small little islands in the Nile, most notably the Elephantine Island, which is a very famous island there, and then the island that we're going to today, where you'll find the Temple of Philae.
This is the little jungle cruise we're getting on. Not really jungle, obviously, but they keep making Disney jokes naturally. I think this is our very first Mickey sighting of the entire trip.
With the temple on its own island in the middle of the Nile, the only way to get there is on a boat. So we board a small vessel and we're off.
All right, we're on our very own little jungle cruise. Tyler, you look very jungly.
For real.
Yeah, it's cool.
Behind us, that's what we're headed to.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. One of my favorite things about this temple is that when it used to be that the river would rise before the dam, and they literally, people who would be here before that have talked about how they used to like canoe or they would ride boats through this temple when the water was really high, and I think that is so cool.
That's very cool.
The Temple of Isis is better known as the Temple of Philae because of the island that it used to sit on, but it has some of the most fascinating history of all the temples in Egypt. This island is home to several temples, but the largest is the temple dedicated to the goddess Isis. A large courtyard surrounded by columns marks the entrance. These columns were Roman built, and while the east colonnade is complete with hieroglyphics, the west colonnade remains unfinished, with columns devoid of symbols or ornaments. Most of this temple was built relatively recently by Egyptian standards, around 300 to 250 BCE, beginning during the reign of Ptolemy II. Construction stretched into the early Roman period, which means you'll find aspects of both Egyptian and Greco-Roman architecture. This grand temple of Isis remained a pilgrimage site and a place of worship for the cult of Isis long into the beginnings of Christianity. As the Roman Empire embraced Christianity and Constantine outlawed pagan religions, this temple sat just far enough away from the rule of Rome that Isis, goddess of healing, fertility, magic, and death, continued to be worshipped here as late as 550 CE. Throughout the following centuries, however, Christians took over the temple and carefully defaced many of the Egyptian reliefs. This temple also holds another secret. It was here that the last hieroglyphics ever were inscribed, according to legend, on August 24th, 394 CE. And it wasn't long after that that the language was thought to be lost forever. It would be 1,400 years before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, and the system of writing was once again unlocked. perhaps one of the most recognizable structures on the island is the Kiosk of Trajan, an unfinished open-air temple that was the subject of many Victorian-era paintings. Just like Abu Simbel to the south, the Temple of Philae was at risk of being lost forever with the building of the Aswan High Dam, so it was moved, stone by stone, 20 meters higher from the island of Philae to a new island called Agilkia in the 1970s. Prior to being moved for 6 months out of every year, the temple was partially submerged underwater. That means when people would visit, they would take a rowboat through the towering columns. The black high water marks are still visible today on the temple itself and the surrounding islands. So we took that boat to a bus, and that bus took us to another boat, and this boat was the traditional Egyptian Felucca. And we boarded the Felucca at the Old Cataract Hotel. So we were just here last night, and I walked outside and I'm like, gosh, this place looks so familiar, and I couldn't place how I knew it. So I thought, well, I don't know, maybe I saw it somewhere, I don't know. So we get there the next day and we walk outside and it's daylight, and I'm like, I know exactly how I know this place. It's the cover picture on one of my guidebooks. Aswan could not be more different from Cairo. Where Cairo is pandemonium, Aswan is calm and serene. And perhaps the best way to experience it is from the water. Here, the Nile moves at a languid pace, sliding past rocky islands, slowly making its way north. So we're pushing off, and out of nowhere, these boys come up, ages, 8 to 12, give or take, and they start to sing. They sing a couple quick songs in exchange for a little cash from the tourists, and then they're on their way. This is their playground, a place to hang out and have fun, just as yours may have been a cul-de-sac or a local park. Theirs is the Nile. When the Aswan High Dam was built and Lake Nasser was created, all of the Nile crocodiles were relocated to Lake Nasser, so there's no longer crocodiles in the actual Nile itself. So these kids are a few modern-day Nile crocodiles. We sail for about an hour with nothing to do but relax and enjoy. The warm wind blows, catching the sails of the feluccas, brushing past our faces and pushing us along our way. We have a few hours on board and we sit and relax and slowly drift towards our next stop, which is the Temple of Kom Ombo. The Temple of Kom Ombo is a little bit unique in Egypt in the fact that it's actually dedicated to two gods. It's split right down the middle, and on one side is the god Horus, which is also known as Horus the Elder, and on the other side is the local crocodile god named Sobek. With its location right along the bend in the Nile, Kom Ombo has a stately presence. And witnessing it just as the sun goes down, casting it in hues of red and amber, is spectacular. Kom Ombo is a stop on many river cruise itineraries, so it's typically pretty crowded, but still worth seeing. Columns in the forecourt still retain some of their color, reminding us that these temples, brown and faded now, were once rich and alive, with saturated colors. The temple splits right down the middle, with two gods mirrored on either side. On Sobek's side, you'll find depictions of crocodiles or crocodile-headed men, and on the other, you'll find more typical scenes of the god Horus, portrayed with the head of a falcon.
All right, so it's evening time. It's really cool. It's really cool. We got to see it. The sun was setting, and then we got to see them flip the lights on, which was neat. But yeah, we're learning a little bit more, and we were able to walk here from where our boat is down that way, which is really neat.
At night, the entire complex is lit up, casting shadows, providing depth to the inscriptions, and lending the place an air of majesty. Right next to the temple is a large well about 50 feet deep that is connected to several channels where the cult of Sobek likely raised young crocodiles. Which brings us here, the small but interesting Crocodile Museum. Here, 40 mummified crocs are on display, the largest of which is nearly 15 feet long.
Got some mummified crocodiles here. Absolutely fascinating. It's cool to think that these are so old. Like, wow.
Part of me, looking at these crocodiles, I'm like, I don't know. I don't think these things even look real. I don't know. Maybe I'm in denial. We're making our way from Aswan to Luxor, a route that requires going through some locks on the Nile.
Okay, so it's 9 in the morning.
This is so cool. So I literally opened up the window and I kind of looked down. I'm like, it looked like we were about to go into a building, and I looked over and I'm like, oh, we're going to go through the lock. And I mean, we were so close that I even reached out and touched it. It was so cool.
This is
so
really
narrow.
Yeah, this is wild. So yeah, we're crossing through a lock. They said we would this morning, so that sounds about right. Look at that. It smells good.
And there.
Picture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're leaving the first set of locks, and I'm filming the locks, and I am so glad that I just happened to keep rolling because I caught what happened next all on camera.
Good morning. Hello. How are you? You know how much for table clothes? You know how much? Hey, the same people you pay. Hey, you know how much?
How much?
Go from American or English?
American.
Texas with California. Hey, BB love.
I don't want it. No, don't throw it. Don't.
Oh, bravo. No, open for your wife. Open for your wife.
They're trying to sell Tyler. They're throwing stuff at him.
I'm just dying because I did the very first time he was out there. I was just getting footage of the lock, and they were sitting right on the other side of that, and I was just getting footage, and he saw me, and he was like, "Oh boy, he's right there." He was like, "How much?" And I was just trying to get footage, so I was like having a conversation with him, and he just threw it in the room. He just threw it right in my chest. I was just not expecting that,
And we knew they would come beside the ship.
Yeah,
Like that's the thing.
I just didn't expect him to throw it at me.
With such force.
Hilarious. This was one of my favorite days because we spent almost the entire day just drifting along the Nile. We sat on deck with no plans and nowhere to be, watching life drift by. And now, I invite you to just take the next 3 minutes out of your very busy day, drop what you're doing, and simply enjoy cruising along the Nile. Observe scenes that have played out just like this, unchanged and uninterrupted, for millennia. One of the most fascinating things about river cruises, and this is not just true here but everywhere they do them, the ships will pull up right next to each other and you can walk through multiple ships to get to the dock. Luxor was once the capital of Egypt. Back then, it was called Thebes, and from about 1550 to 1069 BCE, it was the most important city in all of Egypt. It's often described as the world's largest outdoor museum because this place packs a punch when it comes to historical sites. It's home to the temples of Karnak and Luxor, to the Valley of the Kings, to the Ramesseum, to the Colossi of Memnon, Deir el-Medina, and the temples of Hatshepsut, just to name a few. There's so much here. Even the ancient Greeks and Romans came here to stand in awe of these Egyptian marvels. In the heart of Luxor, you'll find the temples of Karnak, dedicated first and foremost to the god Amun-Ra. Karnak is an absolutely massive temple complex that would easily fit St. Peter's Basilica from Rome and St. Paul's Cathedral from London just in the main hypostyle hall. Dozens of ram-headed sphinxes line our path into the temple complex.
Okay, so we are at Karnak Temple, or temples, and we're exploring it right now. Thank you. We're getting misted. It is absolutely humongous, like way bigger than anything we've seen yet, like width-wise.
To walk through Karnak is to take a stroll through over 1,000 years of Egyptian history. As a general rule, the further in you go, the older the buildings. When you first walk in to the right, there's sort of a little ramp or a hill made out of mud and stone and brick that goes right up against the wall. This ramp is actually how ancient Egyptians built high walls, and it gives us a clue as to how they may have built all of their ancient sites, including possibly even the pyramids. The largest area of the complex, the Great Court, once stood here, although all that's left now are some ram-headed sphinxes, this column, the last of 10 that once stood here, and this statue of Ramses II. Beyond the Great Court is the most impressive area of Karnak that still stands, the Great Hypostyle Hall. 134 colossal columns create a forest of stone. Each column is covered in hieroglyphics, and they're topped with the shape of a papyrus plant. In ancient times, these columns were a symphony of color, a little of which remains today. When the Nile would flood, this area would be filled with several feet of water. That, combined with the fact that there was once a roof on this area, gave this whole room a dark, swampy atmosphere, just like the banks of the Nile, where the papyrus plant grew. To give you a sense of how absolutely massive these columns are, here's a little demonstration. It takes 12 tourists with arms fully outstretched to wrap around a single one. It's a little fun to get lost in here. Take your time and wander through the columns, crane your neck, and observe the intricate etchings. Find a little space to be alone and soak in the wonder that is the Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak. Here is a very short little family ancestry for you here. So much of this was built by Amenhotep III. Now, he built a lot onto Karnak. He also built a great temple on the other side of the Nile, close to the Valley of the Kings, most of which is gone now, except for the Colossi of Memnon. And that was the largest temple complex ever built, which is crazy. So Amenhotep III had a son, Amenhotep IV, who changed his name to Akhenaten. Now, Akhenaten is oftentimes called the heretic king because he basically changed the state religion to worshiping only one god, which I think was the god Amun-Ra, and himself. So not really monotheistic, kind of a little bit. But he basically was known as a heretic. He kind of changed the whole style of art for a while, which was fascinating. You can look at statues of him versus statues of other pharaohs, and his definitely looks very different. His wife was named Nefertiti. She also was depicted very differently in the very famous statue of her with her tall hat on and whatever. She's beautiful and all that. That's all that. So that's Akhenaten. Now, Akhenaten had a son, and his name was Tutankhamun, also known as King Tut. And it was basically King Tut's job to revert the state religion back to the polytheistic, many ancient gods of Ptah, Amun-Ra, all of them. That was sort of his lot in life. Now, he died really young, and then he would have been a relatively unknown pharaoh had it not been for the fact that in 1922, Howard Carter found his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and now King Tut is probably the most famous pharaoh of all time. So I guess it just goes to show you that sometimes if you go in, you do the work, you keep your head down for 3,000 years, you might just become one of the most famous people on the planet. Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and King Tut were far from the only pharaohs that built onto Karnak. One of the only female pharaohs we know of, Hatshepsut, built this towering obelisk, the tallest in Egypt. Seti I and the great builder himself, Ramses II, added on the Hypostyle Hall, and dozens of other pharaohs added, removed, rebuilt, and enhanced this complex, culminating in a patchwork of courts, temples, obelisks, and statues. Sacred lakes such as this one were both sources of drinking water and for use in purification rituals by priests. One of the more quirky features at Karnak is this, the scarab beetle statue. Legend has it that if you walk around it 7 times counterclockwise, you'll have good luck and prosperity. The innermost sanctuary, commonly referred to as the Holy of Holies, was the most sacred place in all of the temple. Only the pharaoh or a high priest in his stead were allowed to enter here. It was in this room that ancient priests would daily come and honor a statue of Amun-Ra. As you walk through these ancient halls, sanctuaries, statues, pylons, and obelisks, you get an overwhelming sense of wonder. This is ancient Egypt at its most monumental. Okay, so we are now on our way to the Papyrus Museum. Now, I would say that the Papyrus Museum was one of the things that I wouldn't say I wasn't looking forward to it, but it was not very high on my list of things I was excited about. But it ended up being so fascinating and so fun. I'm so glad we ended up doing this. We had this great instructor, and I learned so much that was so interesting.
This plant, it's aquatic and tropical plant in the ancient time, used to grow at the banks of the river Nile. But it's grown nowadays in special farms by the government as the plant disappeared and the government replanted it again. The ancient Egyptians were attracted by the shape of the plant and they considered it as a holy plant and a sacred plant. Why? If you look to the flower of the papyrus plant, it looks like the rays of the sun, or the sun rays. It was a symbol for the greatest god for the ancient Egyptians, the god of the sun. You know his name? Perfect.
So he then proceeds to cut it and roll it out into very thin slices.
That's it, nothing else. If we check the slice now, it came very flexible, you see, and very strong. You can feel the difference between this one and that one. Sugar, or they use the sugar as a natural glue to stick the slices together. And that's the reason the papyrus paper lasts forever, because it's organic, the plant and the sugar, nothing else. By the way, we still got a papyrus paper at this moment in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, 2000 BC. But how we make it? We use felt nowadays, but the ancient Egyptians in the ancient time, they used the animal leather or the animal skins, and we start to make it in lines. The slices, we will make it in lines, but that lines have to be overlapping or crisscross, not weaving at all, just like this. Yes, like this. After that, we will cover it by another piece of felt, and we have to press it to dry and to stick together for another week.
So he then proceeds to show us that if you make a mistake, you can dunk the papyrus in water, remove the ink, you can literally wring it out like a towel, and then reuse it.
Yeah. Are you waiting for a rabbit or something? Or a camel? We have to press that paper again for a couple of days. More than this, if any damage happened to that paper, we can fix that damage. How? Leave the damaged paper in the water for 10 or 20 minutes maximum. And after 10 or the 20 minutes in the water, we can get the damaged slices out. Very easy, like this. Or like that. And just put new slices, press it again to dry, and reuse it. You know what we call this nowadays? Recycling. Yeah, this is the original recycling.
So if it wasn't already worth it to go with Adventures by Disney because of the after hours private tour of the pyramids, it is definitely worth it for this because we have a private tour of the Luxor Temple after dark. It's just us, just our little group. Everyone else is gone. There are no cars in the parking lot, and we have this place to ourselves. I mean, come on. That's amazing. The Temple of Luxor is much smaller than Karnak, but just as stunning. In the front, you'll find 6 statues of Ramses II, 2 seated and 4 standing. Not long ago, only 3 of these colossi were here, but due to restoration efforts, statues that fell and broke in antiquity have painstakingly been restored and placed back in their original spots. In front, you'll find only 1 obelisk of what used to be a pair. If you're looking for the second one, you'll have to visit the Place de la Concorde in Paris. It was this second obelisk that, if you recall, was given to King Louis Philippe of France in exchange for a green clock tower that never worked at the Mosque of Muhammed Ali in Cairo. For centuries, this entire temple was buried under sand. A 14th century mosque inside the temple illustrates where the ground level used to be before excavation. Luxor Temple was constructed primarily by Amenhotep III and Ramses II, a theme you'll find throughout all of Egypt. But other ancient pharaohs, Alexander the Great, the Ptolemies, and even the Romans, all added on their touch to this temple throughout the centuries. In the middle of the temple, you'll find the astounding hypostyle hall with dozens of towering papyrus columns. Around the 4th century AD, this temple was occupied by the Romans, and they did their best to cover up the ancient pagan symbolism. They converted this antechamber into a church, plastered over the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and painted their typical frescoes on top. But here we are, nearly 2,000 years later, and the Roman paintings have slowly fallen away, while the ancient Egyptian reliefs hidden away behind them still remain. So we did our tour. It was like a 30-minute tour where she told us about everything. We have about 30 minutes left, and she just gave us free time. And because we're here alone, I'm literally wandering around the Temple of Luxor, and I'm in rooms that nobody else is in. I feel like I'm literally, like this entire back half, everybody's already gone. So I'm like wandering around the Temple of Luxor completely by myself. What an absolutely crazy feeling. I feel like I'm here like completely alone. This is just wild. This is so cool. Luxor Temple is located right in the heart of modern Luxor. It's a funny contradiction as you walk through surrounded by ancient columns and statues, and then you turn your head and see modern conveniences right outside. In ancient times, the temples of Karnak and the Temple of Luxor, about 2 miles apart, were linked by the incredible Avenue of the Sphinxes. In November 2021, after 70 years of excavation and restoration work, that ancient walkway is finally, once again, open. For the first time in 3,000 years, modern-day travelers can walk from Luxor to Karnak along this ancient pathway. Today we are in the Valley of the Kings. Now, if you don't know what the Valley of the Kings is, it is a place where over 60 of Egypt's pharaohs are buried, and it is a place that in 1922, Howard Carter made the discovery of King Tut's tomb. Now, I'm going to resist the temptation here to start singing King Tut by Steve Martin, and instead, I'm just going to go ahead and roll the footage. While the east bank of Luxor is home to ancient temples like Karnak and Luxor, along with the modern city of Luxor, on the west bank of the Nile, there's the occasional small village, but it's mostly open space and vast desert. In ancient times, the largest temple complex in the world stood here, although virtually none of that complex still stands except these, the Colossi of Memnon. Scattered remains of old temples can still be found. And it's really cool because as you're driving, you can see active archaeological digs going on all around you. But for the most part, there's not a lot over here but remote, unforgiving, barren desert. And that made this the perfect hiding spot for the ancient pharaohs' most important treasure, themselves. So, very basically, starting at Saqqara, ancient pharaohs were building pyramids as tombs. It culminated with the 3 Great Pyramids that we see in Giza, but there's also the Step Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid at Saqqara. Then we have the 3 Great Pyramids at Giza. But here's the problem. They kind of stand out like beacons to thieves because pharaohs buried themselves with all of their earthly treasures because they believed that you would actually get up in your body and continue on living in the afterlife. So they brought everything they could possibly need, all their riches. So most of their tombs were looted almost right away. So around 1550 BCE, pharaohs finally got wise and decided to start hiding their tombs in the Valley of the Kings.
All right, so we're at the Valley of the Kings, which we are so excited about. We're on like a little shuttle that's going to take us to, I think, the area where most of them are.
Yeah, they said most of the time we walk from the parking lot, but I guess this is pretty far out from the visitor center. They don't want the big buses to be rattling and vibrating the ground and disturbing the tombs. So the Valley of the Kings is where King Tut was found and all that kind of stuff. So this is huge. So far, 63 tombs have been found here. Some people think there might be more still to be discovered, TBD. But unfortunately for the pharaohs, all this hiding was done in vain because almost all of them were completely looted, with the exception, most notably, of the tomb of King Tut, which is why it was such a revelation at the time because all of his stuff was still in there. As you descend into the tomb of King Tut, it's hard not to imagine Howard Carter and his British patron, Lord Carnarvon, being here and opening the passage for the first time, peering into the dark and seeing, in Carter's words,
"Wonderful things, strange statues and animals and gold, everywhere the glint of gold."
It was from this very place that so much changed for Egypt. What's wild, though, is when you're down there, you know that this was such a momentous discovery, but the room itself is pretty small and it's packed with people, so it's kind of hard to really enjoy being down there. But on one side, you'll find the sarcophagus that's still there. The walls around the burial chamber depict Tutankhamun alongside images of the gods, performing various ceremonies in preparation for the afterlife. And then on the other side, you'll find King Tut himself in a climate-controlled glass case. He's the only pharaoh still in the Valley of the Kings that remains interred in his tomb. All others have been moved to Cairo and placed in museums.
Okay, So we're sweating in the Valley of the Kings. This is so cool. We already saw King Tut's tomb, wildly packed in there, wildly hot, but it was just so neat to see, even if just for a second, to have actually laid your eyes on it.
I said there's a lot more decorated, like more beautiful tombs here, but that's obviously the most famous one. So like everybody's in there, and like people are like pushing past each other, like trying to get the picture. I'm like, guys, just relax.
Everyone's mad. Like, in fairness, it's hot.
You know what I mean? But like, just relax.
Yeah, but this is neat. We're kind of in a more, I was going to say quiet, but there's still tons of people around. But you can go, you kind of queue up at the different tombs, and I think your ticket gets you into 3, and you get a separate ticket for King Tut, just FYI. But yeah, this is, you'd almost think we were in the American West. Like, it's so, so cool.
The ancient pharaohs found themselves in a bit of a contradiction. They ruled as gods, but were man enough to fear death and what it may bring. Through these intricate tunnels, armed with the ancient roadmap of the Book of the Dead and their endless treasures, they hoped to find themselves in the good graces of whatever lay beyond death. Each of the 63 tombs in the Valley of the Kings tells a story. For instance, this is the tomb of Tausert and Setnacht. Tausert was the wife of the pharaoh Seti II, and for a brief time after his death, she took power for herself. But her successor, Setnacht, ejected her from her own burial tomb and took it for himself. One of the most shocking things about the Valley of the Kings is all of the color. Because these were all buried underground, much of the color remains on the walls. All the ancient temples above ground would have been painted like this when they were built, but sun, sand, wind, and time have slowly worn away that color over the last several thousand years. Here, you can get a sense of just how colorful ancient Egypt would have been. It's also fascinating that over the course of about 3,000 years, Egyptian art didn't change much. You can look at something painted in 2500 BCE, 1500 BCE, or 500 BCE, and they all might look different, but they would all look like Egyptian art. And you can't do that in modern day. Looking at the art from even a few hundred years ago is vastly different from today.
So we're deep in this tomb, and it's huge. Compared to King Tut's, it's comical. It's cool to see that some of the like gold-ish looking color is left in here. This is where the actual tomb was. Wow.
I think is the craziest thing about all of these tombs and the artwork and that decorates every single inch of the tomb is that this was never meant to be seen by other people. These were burial chambers. They were closed off, and in theory, no one would ever go in them. It was for the pharaohs. So they did all this artwork, and they filled it up with all this stuff. And no one was ever supposed to see it.
And here we are, thousands of years later.
They just put so much care and effort into it, and it was never meant to be seen by a human. It's supposed to live in darkness forever. How wild is that?
That is wild.
The tomb of Ramses IV was originally intended to be much larger, but with the death of the pharaoh at a young age, construction was cut short. And believe it or not, in the 18th and 19th centuries, this tomb was used as a hotel by visitors to the Valley of the Kings. In the Valley of the Kings, you feel a sense of eternity weighing down on this scorched earth. The entire place is a reminder that man's quest for immortality is as old as civilization itself. Why do we know more about the ancient Egyptians than we do about Mayans and other ancient cultures? Part of it is the climate. The desert doesn't tear down cities like the jungle does. But it's also because of the way Egyptians thought about life after death. They believed the actual human body would pick back up and move again. So they made things out of stone with the intention that things would last forever. In their tombs, they would include furniture, art, anything else that they thought they might want or need in the next life. They would bring makeup, beds and games. But through this preparation for the afterlife, in some ways, they were granted immortality. Although the Egyptian Empire effectively ended over 2,500 years ago with the death of Cleopatra, the idea of ancient Egypt lives on today, stronger than ever in the imagination of people across the world. In Egypt, history isn't something you read about in a book. It surrounds you. Egypt is one of the most chaotic, exciting, heart-pounding places I've ever been. But it's also one of the most beautiful, welcoming, and friendly places. Everyone that I met was kind and helpful. Part of the reason that we travel is to get out of our own bubble. Don't be nervous to get out of your comfort zone. It's in those areas of discomfort that you find the most transformative travel. It changes you. It should change you. You come home a different person. And that is the whole reason that we go.